Welcome back to Feeling Seen, the podcast about the movies that make us feel seen. I'm your host, Jordan Crucchiola, and my co-host today is Liza Powel O'Brien. Liza is the writer and host of a podcast from Team Coco called Significant Others, which has just come back for a long-awaited season 2. She's also an accomplished playwright and a veteran of the New York advertising world. And the character she's brought today was a surprise and a delight. Michael Dorsey, also known as Dorothy Michaels, from Sidney Lumet's 1982 classic, Tootsie.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to meet you. I love your podcast. I'm happy to be here.
It's always so nice when people say that, and I literally, like, in the way that, this was so unexpected when someone wins an award. Like, it's always so unexpected. Your podcast is Significant Others. So let's start out with the name, explains it, but also, if you don't know, you might not realize that the name explains it. What is Significant Others cover?
So the idea of Significant Others is that it tells the stories of people who were profoundly influential in the trajectory of a person who we all probably are familiar with through, the stories of history. But in that influence has been lesser known or overlooked or underappreciated. So sometimes it's a spouse, which is obviously indicated by the title. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's a parent. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it is a friend. And I just find I've always been very interested in dualities and in intimate partnerships, not necessarily sexual intimate partnerships, but any kind of, protracted, ongoing, deep connection between two people, I think is always very complicated in really interesting ways. I, at least, can lose track of when someone is illustrious. Mm-hmm. It's one way of putting it.
I like that.
Or known for historical reasons, or known for sort of a drier reason. They're a politician, they're a general, whatever. I can anyway, easily ignore the fact that they were probably in some sort of really interesting, complicated relationship with someone in their life. Yeah. And so sometimes these stories come up that are just, super interesting. Like last season, we told the story of Vladimir Nabokov and his wife. And
What a pairing that is.
Oh,
wow.
Right? I know.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. She was such an interesting person. He was brilliant and kind of, unusual and strange. And she was absolutely as married to him in every sense of the word as a person could be to another person, but also very, very interesting in her own right. And what originally got me sort of interested in them together is that I was told in grad school that she rescued the manuscript of Lolita from the trash. Basically, he was working on it for 4 or 5 years and it was driving him crazy. And he kept saying, I'm nuts to even do this. And they were struggling. They didn't have a lot of money. And she was like, absolutely not. This is going to be our ticket out, which in fact it turned out to be. So, if not for her, that book may never have seen the light of day, which I find fascinating to contemplate, right? So those are the kinds of stories I really, really get interested in. And then turns out their entire relationship is fascinating. It's not even just that tidbit that's interesting. So
that reminds me of I won't say the name because it's not my story to tell, but I have a friend whose dad is a very famous actor. She said that her parents divorced when she was young because her dad couldn't handle that he was the least interesting one in the marriage. And every story she has about her mom is sensational. The life this woman lived and the stories she has about her dad are they're interesting because they're Hollywood stories, so they kind of have that intrinsic. But her mom not being the Hollywood figure, but just having this unbelievable life. Yeah. And he I love the idea that this Academy award caliber actor is just I can't handle being the smaller of the two in my relationship because my wife's simply too interesting.
That's fascinating. We heard a great story once from Don Rickles about his wife, who was also a character. And she, he was best friends with Frank Sinatra. And so they were in all sorts of crazy scenes. And she kept her cool in this way that, I just wish they had a camera rolling on those two because it's a similar, I don't think that he was resentful of her for that, luckily. But But yeah, I think that's a very common, and to me, it's interesting to think about how that is true in every relationship to some degree, whether a person is, known publicly or not. These sort of issues of competition and envy crop up with the people who you're closest to. And I find that really interesting.
Speaking of enriching culture, please tell us the character. And with your professional background especially, I am so curious to see the specifics of how you connected to this character. Who did you bring for us to discuss on the pod today?
Okay. So it's a tricky proposition as a, cis, hetero, white, blonde girl growing up in the 80s in America. It wasn't a struggle for me necessarily to see examples in popular culture of people who were meant to reflect my reality, right? So I was like, however, I was very aware that there weren't really many representations of people who were meant to reflect my experience that felt authentic.
Yeah.
And so I remembered that I would have been maybe 12 or 13 when this movie came out, but the movie Tootsie, which I'm sure has its complications for people who, are outside the mainstream experience, quote unquote mainstream at that point. But for me, I think that watching, and so the character that I identified with, weirdly, is the protagonist, Dustin Hoffman's character, Michael Dorsey, who is a struggling actor who's very, very devoted. He's a true artist and cannot get work. No one will hire him.
And seems to be a tremendous acting coach.
Correct. Well, that's how they portray him anyway. Yeah, he's
sure.
Deeply devoted to his craft and wants everyone who he's working with to succeed. But he's very difficult, partly because he's so passionate.
My friends.
That's super, Michael, lad, but I wonder if you could move center stage on that last speech and then die.
Why?
Well, the left side of the house can't see you at all.
You want me to stand up and walk to the center of the stage while I'm dying?
Well, I know it's awkward, but we'll just have to do it.
Why?
I just told you, now do it.
Because you say so.
Yes, love.
Not with me, is Tolstoy.
And he has a student/romantic interest, Terry Garr, who is pitch perfect. She's phenomenal in everything she ever did, right?
Thank you so much for... on the way into recording today, I was having a conversation with producer Marissa about I miss Terry Garr. Terry Garr was formative to my upbringing. I love Terry Garr. Thank you so much for spotlighting Terry Garr, who was perfect in everything she's ever done.
It's absolutely true. I don't think that we have devoted enough attention and love to her in general because she was just so good at what she did. This is a bit of a sidebar,
I think Terry Garr belongs in almost like a Madeline Kahn conversation. I see them as companion figures in my mind.
I also don't think that we can, I don't know if Catherine O'Hara was inspired by Terry Garr, but I feel like we might not have some Catherine O'Hara characters were it not for Terry Garr. So Catherine O'Hara, of course, being another absolute genius.
Yes.
So Michael Dorsey, the struggling actor, is coaching his friend on a soap opera role she's auditioning for. She doesn't get it. She's very upset. And he gets mad because he thinks he knows he can do the role. So he dresses up as a woman. He goes in and auditions and takes liberties with his audition, which I think we're meant to understand as because he is this difficult, passionate artist.
Yeah.
He is sort of changing the game in a way that ends up working for him. There's also the element, obviously, that he is a male person. He's coming at this from a male perspective.
Mr. Carl, I'm an actress. I'm a character actress. I can play this part any way you want.
Honey, I'm sure that you're
Why
a
don't you
very,
give me an
very
idea
good
what you're
actress.
looking
It's just
for?
that you're a little bit too soft
What?
and genteel. You're not threatening enough.
Not threatening enough? How's this? You take your hands off me, or I'm gonna knead your balls right through the roof of your mouth. Is that enough of a threat?
To start?
Yes, I think I know what y'all really want. You want some gross caricature of a woman to prove some idiotic point, like power makes women masculine, or masculine women are ugly. Well, shame on the woman that lets you do that, on any woman that lets you do that. And that means you, dear. Miss Marshall, shame on you, you macho shithead.
Jesus.
What is idiotic about power making a woman masculine? Not that that was my point.
Miss Michaels, just a minute.
Nancy Weiser to video transfer.
Was that for real in there, or were you auditioning for the part?
Which chance you'll get me a reading, Miss Marshall?
Well, good for you. Come.
I don't really think that the movie intends for him to be presented as an entitled by masculinity character so much as just blind to social norms because he's so deeply artistic.
Yes.
But it can't be avoided that, this is the dichotomy that they're working with. So anyway, so he gets this role as a middle-aged woman, basically. Well, he was
a hospital administrator on a soap opera.
That's right, Dorothy Michaels. And he does it brilliantly. He's very, very good at it. He falls in love with his co-star, Jessica Lange. He's dressing up for their first quote-unquote date when she asks him to come run lines with her, and it's getting very confusing to everyone around him.
Now, what do you mean you don't have a thing to wear?
She has seen me in all of these.
Wait, she hasn't seen you in the white thing.
What, this?
Yeah.
You cannot wear white to a casual dinner. It's too dressy.
You couldn't wear pants?
No, pants, I can't.
What about this thing?
No, I don't have the right shoes for it. I hate the way the horizontal lines make me look too hippie, and it cuts me across the bust.
I think we're getting into a weird area here.
This is smart. What about this? Seriously.
Well, you look like you should be ringing a school bell.
This may seem silly to you. This is our first date. These won't look pretty for her.
Point being, it's a comedy, so things unravel spectacularly, and then we hope that everything got put together correctly in the end. But what I loved about it was that he learns and he shows to us how hard it is to perform femininity from the get-go. Like, this is his job. He now has to become a woman for this role. And the first thing he does is ask his agent for $1,000 because he has to go get clothes.
Yeah.
And he has to get up at 4:30 every morning to put the makeup on and shave and all the stuff.
See this laundry? You know what it costs? And the makeup? I don't know how a woman could keep herself attractive and not starve these days. Kind of a little more kind of cheap.
Is this the one you ordered in?
Oh, yeah, I gotta set that before I go to bed. Easy, please. I'm dieting, please. I gotta get up at 4:30, do a close shave. I already called the studio and told them that I gotta do my own makeup because I have an allergy.
And I think what it helped me with at that sort of adolescent moment of figuring out, like, what are my options? How can I be in the world? That it was acknowledging, okay, it's really difficult to be a quote unquote beautiful woman who conforms to this, standard. And then also he's supposed to be dieting. I mean, he really kind of immerses in the role of being a woman. And to me, I think it just revealed that it is a role, that it can be a role. Right. And so I felt liberated from the expectation of being any particular type of woman because it was, sort of, I'm trying to think, okay, was that really the only time it was revealed to me? But in a mainstream popular culture kind of a way. And it's so fascinating that it took a man being in a woman's role to acknowledge out loud in this sort of, generalized public forum that no, it is genuinely difficult to be a beautiful woman or a successful woman or whatever it is. I mean, obviously there are plenty of, movies and shows that are trying to make that point. Who's the Boss also comes to mind. Another favorite of mine. I don't know if you remember Who's the Boss.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Who's the Boss?
Yeah. So, Angela definitely struggled with her dual roles of being beautiful woman and successful. Anyway, so I found some sort of solace, I guess, in watching, like, again, coming from the perspective of the early 80s where, a male, like a cute, nebbishy, brown-haired, like, go-get-'em protagonist was, like, the Matthew Brodericks. Like, that's who was winning everything in those movies and in those portrayals of, American life. And if he couldn't really even do it, Well, then how am I supposed to be expected to do it? So, so I stopped shaving is what I did. No.
So I liberated myself.
Exactly.
I think one of the sweetest things that to me holds up about this movie is the tenderness that Michael immediately feels for Dorothy. And like he starts, he's like, well, her hair, she deserves to, like, there's that night where he's at home with his roommate Bill Murray, and he's like picking out like the curls in the wig, and he's like, she just, she deserves to be more beautiful than that.
I don't like the way he condescends to me either. Calls me sweetheart, calls me honey, doesn't even know my name. Calls her baby. He pushed me around today. I'm telling you, if I didn't have the dress on, I would have kicked his arrogant ass in.
How'd you ever end up communicating with this guy?
Well, he told me what he wanted. I didn't agree with him. I didn't say anything. I did it the way I wanted to. He bawled me out. I apologized to him. That was that. I think Dorothy's smarter than I am. I just wish I looked prettier, I look in the mirror and maybe I can just get a softer hair or something, because she deserves it.
And talking about that, like he says, like, this is basically, he's like, it's hard to understand, but this is our first date, like you said, talking about Jessica Lange, and he wants to look beautiful for Jessica Lange because he says that she deserves to have that, like for Dorothy to show up looking her best because he feels for this woman. And so, like, this is a movie that is so set up to be like 50 years later, we look at it and we're like, whoa, the passage of time was not kind. But there's kind of a lack of understanding or confusion, somewhat understandably, from the people around him of like, why are you doing this? And like, I'm uncomfortable. And at one point his agent is like, don't sit too close to me. Like when they're at a restaurant, because he knows that he's that she's Michael.
No, there's definitely a level of transphobia existing in the universe of the film, and a level 100%. Of homophobia and all of that. I can't. Again, that's not my lens, so I can neither dismiss it nor endorse it. But to me, I feel like what might mitigate that, hopefully, is that there is this, as you say, this deep identification and humanity to and it's funny because the Broadway version of this show got kind of pilloried for being deeply transphobic, and I haven't seen that, so I don't know the difference. But from what I gathered about criticisms of the musical is that it was very reductive in terms of, and empowering, because she became a woman and therefore she got everything she wanted, and
because she's a girl boss now. He's a girl boss now,
right? And that's so not true. And the fact that we watch this, great fish out of water moment of, this guy who has never had to live as a woman, obviously, never chosen to live as a woman, hasn't had that experience. And so he sees with fresh eyes the stuff that, a lot of women just kind of forget to notice, like the fact that he can't get a cab to stop for him, the fact that, people are sexually harassing him left and right. And obviously all of this is amped up for the comedy because it is, I think, a very funny movie.
I agree.
Yeah. But I think that is such an important piece of it, as you say, that there's this, it's beyond empathy. It's like, truly living in someone else's shoes. And
he takes Dorothy completely seriously as a full autonomous being. And that is like, that's his pretentious artist, like, informing that, like, as he says, he's like, this is the great acting challenge of a lifetime. Like, this is the role of a lifetime. Like, I'm playing a woman. But he doesn't reduce it down to its gimmick. I so appreciate that the movie immediately has him taking her seriously as a person with wants and needs and a history and desires and, like, what she deserves. And it is so incredible to, like, look at, like, the flip, like sandwiching, like, 1982 Dustin Hoffman playing, Michael Dorsey, struggling actor, being like, and you watching this and being like, wow, this taught me that gender's a performance.
Right.
And that it's all drag.
Right.
And now the way that people can access that conversation, like that literal statement, is in RuPaul's America. Like, not Paris is burning drag culture,
right,
like in its seedling form. a fringe art form in drag artistry into big bucks, headline must-see TV with watch party nights in bars. Like, that is, like, the you growing up now can look at, even if they themselves are not a genderqueer individual, they can look at RuPaul saying that it's all drag, honey. Like, that gender is all a performance.
Right.
I think that's, God, that should be asserted, I feel like, to every child, at every person at some point in their life, like, hey, guess what? It's all a performance. Like,
right. And you can engage in that performance to whatever degree you want.
Yeah.
In whatever direction you want. Like, you can play with it on a daily basis. You do, like, there's no law that says you have to, you know, be one thing, or I don't know. Everything gets so reduced to oversimplified. And it's funny when you talk about everything being drag. That's another piece of this movie that I know that, so Jessica Lange, the love interest, is the ingenue in the soap opera. She introduces herself as hospital slut. That's her character.
Yeah.
And she's just unbelievably seductively beautiful, and tender is the right word for her. She's, you know, I remember literally going like, how does she get her hair to do that? Like, the curls in her hair are so perfectly soft and bouncy, and they don't look fake. I mean, I have no idea if that's just like how she wakes up in the morning, or if
she's maintained it for so long in her life. I don't know what the answer could be, just other than Jessica Lange has it like that, which would be utterly unsurprising to me.
Yeah. But I remember being sad for her character, you know, which again, we're meant to feel a little that way, but because she is, of all of those characters, I feel she's the one who's most locked into a performance. That, like, she has been assigned something and she has agreed to it, maybe without even realizing, and she is struggling under it. She's an unwed mother, which she seems to be okay with, but also I think we're given a window onto how difficult that is for her.
Yeah, when Dorothy says, like, oh, it's how hard can a baby be? And then we get that, like, smash cut to, like, Dustin Hoffman running around telling a baby, well, he's running around in a dress telling a baby, I love you. And it's just screaming at him for hours.
Right. And then the nanny that she relies on to help raise the child is she's terrified of. And there's no, you know, there's no warmth there. And so I don't know. I think, who knows what these men who wrote this movie had in their, I mean, I know Elaine May contributed to this movie, and I do think speaking of significant others, I think she is one of the greatest stories of all time, which has yet to be fully told. And I now can't watch it without wondering, like, which line did she write? Which line did she like? There's so many good jokes in there, and she was, you know, such a brilliant writer. I don't know if she's still working, but.
Talk about a podcast guest for you.
Well, yeah, I don't know how. I think she's fairly retiring, but but no, I would love to get my hands on her in any way possible. Anyway, so yes, I think you're really onto something when you talk about the tenderness of this film, because again, even though it's a big, high concept comedy, and it was very much that, you know, I mean, the 80s were not a time that is looked to for its sensitivity to the breadth of human experience.
God, no.
But this one, I think, again, because it's attuned to truth, you know, in terms of character, in terms of human experience, in terms of social, you know, machinations, the way things tend to work, or did then at least, I think it brings us so much more than it might even have tried to.
Michael Dorsey is very good at certain things, but he sort of is, in certain ways, the epitome of that, like, the confidence of a mediocre white man.
Right.
And the idea of wearing that inside you and really believing it and bringing it to, like, whatever milieu you work in is him walking in dressed as a woman, raised and nurtured and inculcated with the confidence of a mediocre white male who, while in drag, can bring that blustering sense of just, I'm going to walk into an audition and I'm going to change the lines. Like, he's working with Terry Garr on just getting her to stay angry enough to play assertive in the audition. And then he walks in there and is like, I'm going to insult the director. I'm going to improv the lines. I'm going to get this job.
That's right.
And that is living the credo right there.
Right.
Because it's, It's easier to walk the talk, I feel, when you have the buffer around you at the end of the day of being able to take off Dorothy and being able to like pitch down your voice and like, you know, calling for that cab like, oh, excuse me. And then like, hey, like shouting at the cab and it finally stops for him, even though he's in a dress. Like it is fascinating to watch how like, so the way to win is to, at the core of it, like also be a dude.
Exactly.
Like, God damn it.
I know. And it's, I think, partly satisfying as a story because it follows that, like, you know, Greek ethos that to succeed, the character has to sacrifice something, right? So he can get exactly what he wants, only he can't be himself and have it. And he can't have love and have it. He can't, you know. So there's a very satisfying paradox at the heart of it, which I think I'm sure we could write, you know, a doctoral dissertation on what is this saying about being female and, you know, it could go many different ways. I think, you know, bottom line is it's just hard to be in the world, you know, and we all have our different struggles and harder for some than others. And, you know, it's great to keep that in mind when you're interacting with pretty much anyone.
It's time for a quick break, then I will be right back with Liza Powell O'Brien. Then I'll have one quick thing about the latest venture from a Coen brother that is not a Coen Brothers production, Drive Away Dolls.
I'm Emily Fleming.
And I'm Jordan Morris.
We're real comedy writers.
And real friends.
And real fucking cheapskates.
We say, why subscribe to expensive streaming services when you could stream tons of insane movies online for free?
As long as you're fine with 25 randomly inserted super loud car insurance commercials.
On our new podcast, Free with Ads, we review streaming movies from the darkest corner of the internet's bargain bin.
From the good to the weird to the holy shit, look at Jean-Claude Van Damme's big old butt.
Free with Ads, a free podcast about free movies that's worth the price of admission.
Every Tuesday on MaximumFun.org or your favorite pod spot.
Hallelujah! Hello, welcome everyone.
Step right up. We're going to heal you. We are the healers, Ross and Carrie.
Yes, you there. You look like you're upset. Come up here.
Yes, you are healed because you've listened to our podcast.
Yes.
Have you been having trouble with demons?
Are you sleeping too much, too little, just right?
We have the solution. It is to listen to
Oh No, Ross and Carrie. A show where we examine unusual claims.
We show up so you don't have to. Find us on MaximumFun.org.
We won't actually heal you.
Obviously, the advertising agency world of New York City, immortalized forever in the not misogynist in and of itself, but like the sort of documenting of the misogyny and ennui of, you know, Don Draper's life in mid-century America. Mm-hmm. I mean, were you wearing total work drag to be in that? Like, was that it was, you know, perhaps late 80s into the 90s, but say on a scale of things, we talked recently on the show about Virginia Woolf and how just sort of insanely transgressive Liz Taylor's character must have been, like watching her at that time. Like they must have thought she was like a demon from hell or something. And then you watch Tootsie and this figure that Dustin Hoffman is playing, like Dorothy is the feminist hospital administrator who like doesn't accept a man's advances of her and says, you'll think of me for my head and not for my body. And like she's inciting women across America to write letters in support. And that now we have RuPaul in the middle. We have you in advertising America. So what is the Tootsie to like Sasha Velour continuum? Spectrum. Where are we following in there for you as a woman in the workplace and ad world?
Well, first of all, I don't know that it's not an inherently misogynistic, you know, industry.
Yeah.
Maybe most industries are. Maybe industry period is an inherently misogynistic enterprise. I don't know.
Like an industry. Capital I industry.
Just period. Well, I mean, I have this thing that happens to me all the time where I don't know if anyone else does this, but I think about, as you get older, you realize like who you are partially as defined by who you're not. you know? And so the more you learn about yourself and like, well, that's just, I'm just never going to be the kind of person who wants to stay up all night. Like, that's just not going to be me or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, what would the world be like if it were filled with people who were only like me? Like, what would we not have?
Yeah.
We would not have buildings. We would not have, machines really of any kind. Like there's so many, we'd all have
STEM,
a lot of,
generally STEM.
We'd have a lot of conversations. We'd make
we would
a lot
be
of
so
toast.
emotionally enriched.
That's right. So, so I don't know. It's just built by someone who's so different than I am.
Yeah.
Any kind of giant corporate structure, that it's just hard for me to wrap my head around. Like, well, how much, rightness and wrongness is baked into that from the beginning. I can't even begin to comment. But but I think that I got off fairly easily, I think, in my job because I was what they call a creative. And I love the way that they turn it into a noun.
Fungible asset.
That's right. A creative in the advertising industry when I was a part of it was, and maybe still is, there's a certain amount of license that you get. And actually people kind of expected you to be interesting or whatever. So in fact, if I came to work in like a Banana Republic suit, I would be discounted. Like people would think like, you can't possibly be a good writer because you are dressing like an account executive. And then I know that all of the account executives that I worked with did wear, there were a lot of pencil skirts. There were a lot of like, travel agent blouses, but I didn't get the sense that, I think if people hated that, if they wanted to do it differently, I think it was like, we are a creative industry. That is okay.
Sure.
I'm an advertiser. Like, it was so high on its own supply in the 90s.
I can't imagine. I came into publishing and magazine writing on the like the middle of the crash in 2008. The stories that my editors had of like the expense accounts and the dinners, I can't even imagine. Like, it was a rich industry. I can't even imagine what it was like in advertising, which is the money that kept that industry afloat.
Well, and I was there from like 94 to 2000.
Oh, halcyon days.
Yeah. And because it was in the 70s was sort of the beginning of the real creative advertising, with the ads for the VW Bug, which were so famous. And
yeah.
So I know the Mad Men era is known, but in terms of it being like a, an industry where art and commerce actually did collide, spectacularly, that began in kind of the 70s. Maybe late 70s, really, some of the 60s. But anyway, point being, in the 80s, then it was like Nike happened, and those ads were so great.
Mac ads.
Macintosh ads, that Apple 1984 ad.
The 1984, like,
amazing.
Free yourself from the darkness and the chains.
Yep, and that was 1983. So I got, that's why I wanted to be in advertising. I wanted to write, and I had to get paid for it, and that was one of my few options. But I also was really proud to be. It was exciting. There were a lot of great, and a lot of like less known, really smart, funny, interesting, beautiful work. And then, that does seem to have shifted. Like, having just watched the Super Bowl, we were like, what? I didn't even understand half they were moving so quickly. There were a lot of cuts and a lot of cameos and the
TikTokification of the ads.
Yes. And the one with Jennifer Coolidge was the only one that I actually was engaged with because it was slow enough. It was at human speed.
Yeah.
And she's so brilliant also, speaking of comedic female performers. That was so it stood out so much to me because it was so quiet, and just like a real human moment.
So, okay, when do you start writing plays?
Well,
and when you start doing that and you're responsible for creating these fully fledged lives on paper. Like, I think that, I started thinking about it when you mentioned the, you define yourself as much by sort of what you're not as by what you are. Like, it's a big responsibility to make people and then show them to people and be like, believe it. like, invest in it, care.
Well, it's funny because the caring is the hard part.
Yeah, like how do you interface with, you're not like thinking about fucking gender necessarily when you're writing with these plays, but when you're like, I'm writing the women on the page that I want people to get invested in, like, is that intuitive? Like, I'm just a woman writing women. Or is it like, damn, now that like I'm in the interiority of like being in this stranger's mind that I'm having to make into a real person, like they deserve my best effort for them.
They do. And I think it's hard. I mean, first of all, I don't know any answer. I don't know how to do this. I don't know that I ever do it particularly well, but I enjoy doing it. I like trying. And what happened is that I had always been a fiction writer. And so I did what I could in advertising. And then I sort of got frustrated with the bureaucracy and the layers of people you'd be pitching ideas to over and over again, and nothing would really come of it. And that just wears you down. So I decided to go get an MFA in fiction writing, which I did. I
decided to pursue the big money. I went for an MFA in fiction.
I got an MFA in fiction. That is possibly the least employable degree on the face of the planet. And I wrote a collection of short stories for my thesis. And while I was getting my MFA, I took a class with a woman named Ellen McLaughlin, who is an actor and a writer. She's Tony Kushner calls her his muse. She was the original Angel in Angels America.
Oh, wow.
She's just spectacular in every possible way. And she just taught this intro playwriting class that I took. And I loved it so much. I loved the structure of it. I loved that there were sort of building blocks. I felt like in the fiction classes, it was Wild Wild West. People were just doing whatever and no one knew why it worked or it didn't. And I just felt kind of confused a lot.
Yeah.
And I didn't write anything that I felt really committed to. I was just kind of like trying stuff, which is fine.
Yeah.
But so then we moved from New York to California, and there's no time like moving away from New York to try to start a career in the theater. But that's what I did.
Fresh perspective. Okay.
That is what I did. So I'm in LA and I was like, I think I'm going to try and write. Also, I wanted to write something of substance. I wanted to write something of some length, but a novel just still to this day feels completely overwhelming.
Yeah.
But a play. And a play is like, around 75, 80 pages maybe. I was like, I think I can do that. So that's when I started writing plays. And then the other cool thing about it is there's this interactive element to the creation of theatrical pieces that, a novelist is just so alone. And I like to be alone, but not all alone. So then it became a lot of like, investigating these worlds where people are figuring this stuff out together. And that's super dynamic and interesting. Very underfunded and sadly hard to access these days, but wonderful nonetheless. And I think not totally dissimilar from writers' rooms in TV. But again, for a lot less money.
Yeah.
So in fact, no money. That's really what I seem to appreciate is a pay-free job.
Yeah, I truly never met a practical career that I liked.
Right.
Can't seem to never could find my passion for coding,
Right, exactly. I think what I like about just personally the form of playwriting is that there's this my workshop professor in graduate school, Ben Marcus, used to talk about how important restraint was for an artist, that like sort of a version of, it's all in the editing, right? It's like what you hold back is very defining, as we said earlier. And in playwriting, there's no narrator there. You have to hold that entire, and I think I'm a bit of an over-commentator. So I think that the fact that I couldn't exercise that faculty forced me to make stuff happen, through dialogue that was exciting to me. So yeah, and again, it does let you get into these like relationships, which is really where I get the most excited.
Like what Michael says, like, we hear him make notes about like what Dorothy deserves. Like she deserves, she, is entitled to. What is the most, when you're writing characters, what is the thing that for you they most deserve, that you want to honor for them? Like depth, it's feeling, it's people care about. Like, I mean, 'cause I don't think it's like ability. I think we're past that point. Like, what is it, the thing where you're like, no, this is what every character of mine should have?
I mean, humanity is the sort of stock answer, and then that makes me think, well, what does that mean? I think you actually put it very well when you said that Michael Dustin Hoffman in Tootsie takes his character seriously. Like, he takes her seriously. He honors her, and I think this is key to characterization, is you honor someone with the full spectrum of human feeling and desire, and then also noticing, like, again, when you think about like what you know about yourself to be true and how you might be different. Like, I have a daughter who's in college, and she called the other day and she was like, I've realized that I'm very good at doing what's asked of me, but I'm less good at deciding what I would like and asking for that, which is, I think, totally appropriate for a 20-year-old, right?
Wow. Also, props to her for being like, I've realized this.
She's always been very good at that kind of thing. But
people pay a lot of money to figure that shit out later.
That is true, or not figure it out. But I think that's part of the fun with characters, is saying, like, so what is this character? What makes this character? So again, to use, Michael Dorsey as the example, he's not just a what do you call it, mediocre white man.
Yeah, he's not.
He is, what he wants more than anything is to succeed at his art. Like, that is his, and he would sacrifice other things for that. So I think that's another interesting way of talking about what defines someone, is what would they sacrifice for what, And you can do a number on yourself if you start applying that to yourself and saying, like, what would I, if it came to, I had to choose between. So better to just put it on the page rather than trying to apply it to your own life, because we're really not in control of it in our own lives to the same degree. But I think it's that. And I also, there's a thing that my significant other has said a number of times that has really stuck with me and been very helpful, actually, in my work. And he said it about one of his favorite movies, which is Unforgiven, that great, Clint Eastwood movie. And it's a really, I mean, I would not gravitate toward a Western, but I'm really glad that I've seen that movie a bunch of times, because it's excellent. And he says one of the things that makes it such a good movie is everyone in it is doing what they think is the right thing. And I think it's very easy when you're creating characters to assign them bad behavior and not justify it, right? And just say, like, well, they're the villain, so they're doing this bad thing. But if you frame each character inside of their universe, where because it's very rare, if it even happens, that an actual human being wants to do the wrong thing or the bad thing. Like,
it's outside the bell curve. I think it's outside. It's there, but it's not in the bulk of the experience.
Right. And what really drives people to do things that are destructive or evil or bad, is a very complicated and, probably very specific situation each time. And so if you assume that everyone is trying to act correctly to some degree, and they have desires they're trying to achieve, and they have things that they want to protect, and some of those things are known to them and some of those things are not known to them, which makes it even more fascinating. Then I think you have real characters.
Why can't you give me a special? Please, I could sing as Dorothy, I could do some monologues. I feel I have something to say to women.
Listen to me, Michael, you have nothing to say to women.
That's not true. I have plenty to say to women. I've been an unemployed actor for 20 years, George. You know that. I know what it's like to sit by the phone waiting for it to ring. And when I finally get a job, I have no control. Everybody else has the power and I got zipped. If I could impart that experience to other women like me...
You gotta listen to me, Michael. There are no other women like you. You're a man.
Yes, I realize that, of course, but I'm also an actress.
I guess my final question to you would be, do you consider, or does it, like, how do you deploy it at this point in your life? Or are you just like, I've lived enough life to not think about that? Like, where does gender performance exist for you now?
I think first of all, as you're talking, I was like, how old do you think I am exactly? I didn't want to make you feel
Well,
that
I
I had taken
I know
offense.
you're older than I am, and I'm 38. So you have
I'm
more
vastly-
experience than me.
Vastly older than you are. But it is interesting. I think now at 53, I am sort of reaching the point that, and I may have felt this way all along, but I think I'm really kind of settling into it, which is, my mode of expression is limited. It just is. And I have stuff that I like to put on and ways that I like to act. And that's kind of what it is. And it's probably been the same since I was 12. And, okay. Like, again,
I know a lot of people my age that right now, because they are like in their late 30s, they have the self-determination and perhaps the monetary ability to just be the person they fully wanted to be at 12.
Right.
So, listen.
That's interesting.
I think that's completely valid.
That's really interesting, actually. It'd be fun to talk to people about like their, who their dream version of their self would have been at that age and where they landed at this point and how it's shifted.
Yeah, where is the 12-year-old in you right now that you have purchasing power?
I mean, I have a lot of, button-down shirts, unfortunately.
You're like 12-year-old me, just fucking loved a button down too.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's so true. I have the school pictures to prove it. Yeah. So yeah, I think. Again, as we said earlier, I am could not be more in favor of. Sometimes I think, yes, we can read meaning into all sorts of things. That's one of the, wonderful things that makes us human.
Absolutely.
But sometimes I think it's actually okay to unweight objects of meaning a bit. Like if a person enjoys a certain mode of expression that's, a visual aesthetic performance or experience or presentation or even, I tend to dress more for like what I want to feel against my skin. Like, especially at this, like I just don't want to put on anything that doesn't feel good and I don't want to be cold and so I don't want to be non-functional. Like there were times when I would wear high heels and now I'm like, absolutely never doing that again. It just doesn't feel good. And I think it's really interesting to notice what comes to you when you're in different modes of expression. Like, how does the world respond differently? But I do my sort of wish for the world, as they would ask our kids in, third grade. What's your wish for the world? My wish for the world is that everyone would devalue to a degree some of these external modes of expression because. What does it matter? Like, everybody should put on what they want to put on. They should look how they want to look. And it should mean what it means to them. And that is what it should mean. It should not mean, anything to anyone else. And I know it's a very Pollyanna thing to say. And
Sure.
And I do.
But it's what you wish for the world. It's what you wish for the world.
And again, the playwright in me can't help but flip around to understand the mentality of people who do get very anxious about what other people are putting on. And I do understand that, like, we have moments of dislocation. Like if you've grown up seeing people dress a certain way your whole life and then suddenly you encounter a person who's doing it differently, it feels a little bit confusing and that's okay. Like we can all handle being a little confused sometimes or surprised and then maybe we move beyond that point. But so I'm just, a boring middle-aged lady who likes to wear a button-down shirt as I always did. And but I actually love seeing people who play with extra gender or based or not, I don't care, but people who play with their clothing, with their their look, with it's a form of art. It's very, very, and some people are very talented at it, some people are not. And
frankly, the people who aren't very talented at it, I kind of love it when they're doing it more because listen, have your audacity.
Absolutely. And
go for it.
Yes, be spectacular. And
be spectacular.
In whatever way you can be. So I know I feel like I'm reducing gender expression to clothing, which is not what I mean. But it is also interesting as you move through the phases of life and young grasshopper, you do certain fires die down a little bit, like, so there are moments where it feels like really important to be a certain way or project a certain thing. And depending on what you want, like if you're trying to find a person you connect with on a certain level, like that might be really important to you at that point. And then, you get to another point, you're like, we're good. We've had our children. We're just watching our Netflix. We're, going to bed at 8:15. Like, who cares what I'm wearing really, or what I look like? And that's a bit of a relief if you can't tell. But I'm so impressed by people who can keep that expression vital even as they age into realms that they may never have, wanted to necessarily have to reckon with at a certain point in their lives.
I think Be Spectacular is now future Max Fun Pledge Drive feeling seen merch.
Great.
I think that's a sticker we need to have.
Great.
Be Spectacular.
Do it.
Quoted Liza Powel.
Don't even have to credit me. I'm like Elaine May. I'm happy to be uncredited in my greatest works.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
In your significance.
Yes.
You are not a significant other. You are significant you.
Aw,
Liza
that's
Powell
so
O'Brien.
nice.
And I am so grateful for you taking the time and talking to us today.
Beyond my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much to Liza Powell O'Brien. You can check out the new season of Significant Others, as well as the whole back catalog of the show, wherever you get your podcasts. And now, that one quick thing before I go, as promised, about the new movie Drive Away Dolls. I got the chance to see this at the Vidiots Theater in Eagle Rock around LA. And first of all, movie, I had a blast. If you like the Coen Brothers brand of sort of caricature-y character, I think this will land with Coen Brothers fans. But at the same time, like, I'm not like categorically the biggest Coen Brothers fan, like, of like their movies generally. Like, they're very good at what they do. It's a little up and down for me, but when you apply their characterization, their dialogue style, their aesthetic to a lesbian comedy that involves like being gay and doing crimes and taking a road trip to Florida, I'm a big Coen fan. And this was not a Coen Brothers production, though, but it is not Ethan carrying the project on his back. He co-wrote and, as he said, basically co-directed this with his partner, his longtime wife, Trisha Cook. And I just think it's a little scream. It's a little scream. Margaret Qualley is just kind of batty, out of her mind, kinetic energy in that way. Margaret Qualley really excels. Beanie Feldstein as a cursing, furious lesbian police officer is definitely my favorite Beanie Feldstein to date. And Booksmart was great, but I want to see this Beanie Feldstein over and over again. Hell, work a song into it. Make it a musical, furious lesbian, insert profession here. Yeah, there's a fundamental plot line that revolves around a case of dicks, you guys. Like, this isn't reinventing the wheel. The original title of it was Drive Away Dykes, but that's a harder sell. That's a harder sell for people to put on a poster, but that kind of is very much the spirit of the movie. It's Drive Away Dykes. It was written, according to Trisha and Ethan, in the early 2000s when you couldn't really get a movie with lesbian leads made and distributed into many theaters, when you had to be kind of like an indie project to get that done. But no more. As Sidney Prescott said in the title of her book, they are out of darkness. They are out of darkness, and listen, it's 5 stars for me if lesbians are up to hijinks and they're on a road trip. And Geraldine Viswanathan is also fantastic. She's the sort of grounding straight man force to Margaret Qualley, and in a movie where there is very little that is straight about it. And that's just going to have a lot of currency with me. So yeah, it's Drive Away Dolls for the one quick thing. And just praising mainstream lesbian movies because I'm a geriatric millennial and that stuff still does not seem normal to me. So I'm going to shout about it from the rooftops when I get it. And that is our show. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at FeelingSeenPod or send us an email at feelingseen@MaximumFun.org. If you want to follow me, I'm Jor Crew on Twitter. Our theme music is by Andrew Epen. The show is produced by Marissa Flaxbart. Our senior producers are Kevin Ferguson and Laura Swisher, and this is a production of Maximum Fun.
Maximum Fun,
a worker-owned network
of artist-owned shows,
supported directly by you.